I'm Michael Bungay-Stanier. This is Change Signal, the podcast where we cut through the blather and the BS and the noise to find the good stuff that works in change management. With every one of these interviews, I end up cutting out some really good stuff that kind of breaks my heart not to share with you. And once again, it happened, this time in my interview with Dan Heath. Now, I hope you've already listened to that episode. It's really good. You'll find it in the feed. And if you haven't heard it yet, or maybe if you have heard it but you want a reminder, let me give you the skinny on what we covered. Now, just to say it out loud, Dan truly is one of my favorite authors on change, and he has been for close to 20 years. His first book, which he wrote with his brother Chip, was Made to Stick. But the book that kind of rang my bell around change is called Shift: How to Change Things When Change is Hard. Dan's got a bunch of books under his belt since then, but this pod conversation illuminated two ideas from his new book, Reset: How to Change What's Not Working. We talked about leverage points and how to find them when they can be so hard to find. We also talked about stacking resources so you can actually make those leverage points really matter. And that's all I'm going to say about it. I want to tease you, so you go back and make sure you listen to that conversation with Dan. Now, in this conversation, there are two other ideas from Dan. I know you're going to find them helpful if you're leading transformation. The first is about setting the vision for change. You might know the biblical statement from Proverbs, where there is no vision, the people perish. Well, we need to rewrite it slightly for the common experience and change and transition projects. Where there is terrible vision, the people opt out. Now, Dan and I have been talking about what it takes to create a vision that's emotional and maybe even poetic. And I asked him, how important is that as a motivator and an invitation to change?
I think it's really important. And I think this is a common failure mode for executives. I remember I was at a conference a couple of years ago and talking to a couple of the top leaders, and they were all excited. They were going to unveil this big initiative. They were calling it 25 by 25, meaning we want to be at $25 billion in scale by 2025. This was a couple of years ago to give them some runway. And man, they just thought this was the cleverest slogan that, it was like Mad Men kind of material.
My soul is alive. I can just feel the audience going, at last. I feel seen. I feel heard.
These two numbers are the same. Therefore, this is like a motivating mission. I mean, I was just, I didn't have the heart to tell them, but there's not one person. I mean, they probably had 1,000 employees together.
Yeah.
There's not one person in the room that gives a damn about getting $25 billion by 2025. Now, these execs probably care because they probably stood to make $12 million if they accomplish that, right?
Right.
I think what a vision does is it shows the why. I mean, none of this is a surprise to the people listening right now, but it's amazing how often we neglect that. We have to connect what we're doing to the why. Like in the Paul Suett case, to link back to that, he was really disciplined about saying, this is not just about some kind of like productivity enhancement in the abstract.
Oh, Paul Suett is the change agent from the first story Dan tells in the original podcast episode, and Paul's quest to sort out the mailing room in a hospital.
We've got nurses in this hospital who are suffering harm because of our failure to get the packages out quicker.
Right.
I mean, literally, medications were spoiling in the box in some cases because they weren't refrigerated in time. Or, they were having to over-order certain supplies for fear of not getting them in time from the receiving area. I mean, there were real consequences. Right. And when you attach the work you're doing to that, all of a sudden, it seems worth it.
How would you coach an executive or a change leader to get closer to that sense of why, that sense of purpose? Because I think that can feel intimidating for people going, look, I don't use metaphors. I'm not a poet. I'm not Simon Sinek. Mm-hmm. How do you help people kind of get a little further away from the equivalent of 25 and 25?
I don't think it has to be poetic to be effective. I think ultimately the why is always going to involve being in service to someone. And it might be the customer. It might be the patient. It might be your students. It might be your internal colleagues, like, the accounting folks that collect your expense reports. or acting in service to someone.
Yeah.
But if you keep yourself grounded in the someone, there's almost an inherent importance there
Yeah.
that just is not present when you start, talking about numbers and increasing this by 10% and decreasing that one by 20%.
I've got some great guests coming soon who will dig deeper into creating compelling visions and how to elevate your marketing of your change project or program. But I think Dan's taken us off to a great start there. The second idea I wanted to rescue was how to break through bottlenecks. Dan's answer draws on something called the theory of constraints. And if you're not sure what that is, don't worry. I didn't know either. So one of these core ideas you've got around finding the leverage points, one of the key insights is around the theory of constraints, which is a pretty intimidating label. But I think it's a really core idea. So what are we talking about here?
Yeah, and by the way, the theory of constraints is from a classic, all-time classic business book called The Goal. It's a very peculiar and wonderful book. It's actually kind of a novel about a failing marriage and a failing factory.
Yeah.
But let me explain the idea that's underneath there. So remember, we're looking for leverage points for our change efforts, places where a little bit will go a long way. And the idea here is, if you can whittle away at the constraint, aka the bottleneck or the limiting factor, you're almost certain to get disproportionate return from that. So
Right.
The story I tell in the book is about my local Chick-fil-A, which I came to realize during the pandemic is actually one of the most successful drive-thrus in the entire country.
Mm-hmm.
They can process 400 cars in an hour. That's a car every 9 seconds. I mean, this thing is just like a beautiful clockworks of nugget delivery.
Yeah.
And after one night where, I got there and there were 50 cars at least in line, and I felt my soul just withering. And then it just started grooving along,
Yeah.
And so I got so curious, like, how are they able to do this? And I went and talked to the owner operator, a guy named Tony Fernandez. And he coached me through it. He said, look, we had kind of a normal average drive-through years ago, and then we started paying careful attention to the constraints.
Yeah.
So the constraint in a lot of drive-thrus is the menu board, where you come up and you place your order. And a lot of times there's only one, or in really, maybe a McDonald's will have 2 lanes. And they said, well, this is a consistent bottleneck. What if we just forget this? So they took the menu board out and they put human beings in the parking lot to take your order at your driver's side window. And the beautiful thing about that is when it's busy, I've seen 6 people out there taking orders at once. I mean, it's just phenomenal. And when it slows down, you go back down to 1. Yeah. And so that's an example of how you have just eliminated a constraint.
Right.
And then, operations people know that you never really, quote unquote, solve a constraint. You just improve the system, and then the constraint bobs around.
Exactly.
So like if you got 6 people in the parking lot taking orders, well, orders are now flooding into the kitchen, and now the poor kitchen people can't keep up. They can't fry that many nuggets. So you got to get them some support, improve their systems. Well, now they can keep up.
Right.
The constraint moves to the meal assembly people that bag and box and so forth. And so you kind of chase the constraint around. Each time you're making progress at the systems level, and you're making so much progress that it kind of earns your way into a new problem.
I hear 2 things here, Dan. The first is having the courage to really concentrate on a single point and kind of go all in on going, this is the thing we're going to fix. The second thing is that it means to change a system, it's an emergent experience. Because when you fix the one thing, the thing goes somewhere else, but you don't know where it's going to go. You're just not sure how this whole thing is going to evolve and grow.
Yeah.
So 2 big ideas from Dan Heath. Number 1, make the vision count. And number 2, understand the theory of constraints. So your change project is fully focused on the thing that really makes the difference. If you want more about Dan, danheath.com. And thank you once again for listening to Change Signal, for recommending it to your colleagues, for giving it some reviews and some love. All of that support and amplification is really helpful and really appreciated. I do hope you've signed up for the newsletter. It's weekly, it's to the point, it's deeply helpful. You find that at thechangesignal.com. And you can always send me your feedback, your comments, your thoughts, your suggestions to podcast@thechangesignal.com. So glad you're listening, and I'm glad you're here.